Hi everyone, number one Marmaduke fan here, and I just feel like I watched breaking news flash by my screen, and my boy missed it. So I just watched Diversity in Comics roast of Plastic Man #3, written by Gail Simone, and he's making fun of her terrible sense of humor. She's still trying to make "let's wang it" a thing. And in Plastic Man #3, there is something that's really important to illustrate the nature of social justice in the professional comic book industry. Because what I've just figured out, what our boy Zach missed, is that we now have the perfect illustration of why Gail Simone is a hypocrite and why it's difficult to interact with comic pros. So in Plastic Man #3, the character, he can shapeshift his body into anything. So he shapeshifts his body into Harley Quinn. So he makes himself look like a buxom lass, but he still has like the bulge in his pants, you know, where his crotch is. And this is sort of played for laughs. It's Plastic Man being a comedic character, shape-shifting his body to look like a sexy young lady's character. Now, let's go read a couple Gail Simone tweets. This one's from November 2016. And please, when you encounter transphobia, stand up, whether from politicians or your family. Say it is not okay. Trans Day of Remembrance. This one from February 2016. Yep, if you're feminist and transphobic, please don't buy my stuff or follow me here. In fact, just go away. So the problem is that Gail Simone has written a book which the case could easily be made that Gail Simone is transphobic for presenting a scene in which a cis male character disguises himself as a woman for comedic effect. It's supposed to be funny because a guy who's a man looks like a beautiful woman. I know for a fact that this is something that upsets a lot of social justice warriors, but let me just give you a few examples. There was a Powerpuff Girls episode where they encountered a horse that likes to put a stick on its head and pretend it's a unicorn. And this horse sincerely believes in its heart of hearts that it really is a unicorn. And there were YouTube videos of trans YouTubers reacting to this, calling it transphobic. There were petitions to try to cancel the new Powerpuff Girls show. Pretty much any instance where you have trans identity being used for comedic effect, that is usually enough for that to be listed as an example of horrific transphobia in media. I found an example on Reddit of people complaining about the Nickelodeon show Henry Danger, where the characters are fighting these women and they don't believe they should hit women, but then a wig comes off one of the women and it's really a man, and then they realize, oh, well, now it's okay for us to hit them. And that's it, based on, I don't watch this show, but based on the description on Reddit, this sounds like a clear instance of this is supposed to be a silly gag. These are supposed to be kind of silly, unrealistic heroes where it's got like this heightened sense of humor. But the takeaway from the good people of Reddit who like to ban Comicsgate and Gamergate discussion is that here's transphobic humor on Nickelodeon. So there's transphobia in Cartoon Network, there's transphobia on Nickelodeon. Where else is there transphobia? There are whole BuzzFeed and listicles on sites like the Odyssey Online of transphobic comedy. There's a lot of back and forth about whether Bugs Bunny is transphobic or not. Is he an inspiration for trans people because Bugs Bunny likes to disguise himself as a lady to escape Yosemite Sam and Elmer Fudd, or is he otherizing trans people by making it for comedy? So the best illustration I can find of this, I think, though, of a trans person talking about why they find this offensive is on Quora. And the title of the article is, As a Transgender Woman, Do you think that TV shows and movies about men who disguise themselves as women are transphobic, transmisogynist? I think the only thing we need to look at from this article to get the thing we need to understand is the first few paragraphs. I would like to be open-minded and say that I am not universally offended by the notion of cross-dressing men in films and television. I really, really want to, but I've had a very hard time thinking of positive representations of cross-dressing men in films or television. The problem for me is that a cross-dressing man is almost always intended to be comedic. If not comedic, the character is presented in a way that is strongly othered with implications of mental instability and treated with revulsion. Now, if someone accused Gail Simone of transphobia, she could say, well, I'm not trying to say that Plastic Man has mental instability. I'm not treating him with revulsion. I'm just having a funny moment in my comic. But the problem, of course, is the death of the author. Since postmodern theory has made the death of the author a popular notion of how to read literature, it doesn't really matter what Gail Simone's intent was. She clearly intended to have this as a silly gag about a man disguising himself as a woman. But whatever her intent was, her intention doesn't matter if people are offended, especially if the people with the right marginalized identity are offended. So the reason this struck me is there can only be a few possibilities, and none of these possibilities are good for Gail Simone. One possibility is that Gail Simone somehow is unaware that there is a significant number of trans people, especially sort of like SJW trans activists. I'm sure there are plenty of trans people who have like a sense of humor where they don't care about yucking it up about this kind of stuff. But for sort of the politically active leftist trans community, it is not just problematic. It's a form of bigotry and phobia to have jokes about male characters disguising themselves as female characters. If Gail Simone doesn't know that, what that means is she's not very woke. She's written an iconic feminist blog, Women in Refrigerators. She lectures people about how their feminism can't be transphobic, but she somehow missed one of the most offensive things that populates the internet in articles about transphobia in cartoons and comic books. So possibility one is that Gail Simone is an ignorant SJW. Possibility two is that Gail Simone has heard of this type of pushback and she disagrees with it. She does not believe it is transphobic for her to have a joke where Plastic Man disguises himself as a girl, in which case she's on the wrong side of history, right? So all it's going to take is for one trans blog to get upset enough, and no matter how courageous she is, I'd actually applaud her if Gail Simone was willing to include humor in her books that she believed was appropriate, regardless of whether it was politically unpopular. The problem is that you can't be allowed to survive with that attitude if transphobia is the next bastion of civil rights, and to be against transphobia is to be against the civil rights of a marginalized community. So if possibility one is that she's ignorant, possibility two is that she is pushing back against the trans community while signaling she wants to be part of the trans community. Possibility three would be she's just purely a hypocrite. There's nothing bold about this. There's nothing about Gail Simone saying I'm okay writing this kind of humor and I don't care about identity politics. It's just this third option is that she's sort of purely self-interested, that the only interest Gail Simone has in social justice politics is in advancing her own interests. And here's why I think this is the case. The title for this video is, "It is lucky that SJWs don't buy comics, or Gail Simone would be branded a transphobe by now." If any SJWs actually read Plastic Man, this would have been at the top of the next BuzzFeed article, but they don't. They watch Powerpuff Girls and Nickelodeon, and they write their top 10 transphobic BuzzFeed articles about the cartoons they watch. They do not bother to read Gail Simone's comic books. So this has mostly flown under the radar so far. Maybe I tried to see if any trans people or radical trans activists had started labeling Gail Simone a transphobe for this, and I haven't seen it yet. So I'm thinking that Gail Simone is just lucky that not that many of them actually read her comics. So my conclusion is that the theory I think is most likely is that Gail Simone just doesn't care about living consistently with these principles, and this fits into something I've concluded with other interactions I've had. I've just concluded that Pat Zurcher does not care about what male gaze theory actually is. He wants to say he's a feminist. He wants to say anti-feminists are bad people and they can all do horrible sexual acts in hell on one another, but he isn't really concerned about living consistently with that when drawing his own art. A guy like Pat Zurcher wants to get the attention and the eyeballs from drawing sexy women, and he wants to be able to throw shade at people for drawing sexy women and catering to the male gaze and contributing to the oppression of women. But he doesn't want to put two and two together and realize that he shouldn't be drawing sexy babes if he really subscribes to male gaze theory. Gail Simone wants to signal that she is against trans-exclusive feminists. She wants to tweet hashtag Trans Day of Remembrance, but she is totally okay with using a sense of humor that the marginalized trans community has decided is inappropriate, problematic, and immoral. So I think the conclusion, the big important takeaway I've taken from this is that not even comic book pros who say they're for social justice actually care about what social justice warriors want. Because if they did actually care about what social justice warriors want, they would start to implement that consistently into their writing. It's sad. This is sort of like a data. The reason I wanted to talk about this is sort of a data point about how it's going to be very hard to actually persuade comic book pros with reason and logic that they're being inconsistent with their own worldview. Because at this point, what are you supposed to say to Gail Simone? If someone like me pointed this out and rose a stunk about this, well, then the anti-Comicsgate people would, the story would be, evil Comicsgater #1 Marmaduke fan tries to get Gail Simone fired for transphobia. He's not an honest actor. It's the James Gunn situation all over again. If you are perceived as a right-winger, the information you have or the arguments you make are less important than the perception that you are a right-winger and therefore a bad source of information. So even if you did write a very persuasive case that this comic book pro is a sexist according to the standards of feminism, or a transphobe according to the standards of intersectional feminism, no matter how persuasive your case is, people are going to wonder, well, this person's a right-winger. They don't have really honest intentions. They're just trying to take down a comic book pro they don't like. And it hurts, because I would sincerely like to see Gail Simone live consistently with the standards she espouses in public. But as long as there's this sort of weaponized attitude towards comic book customers, that they're all right-wing, white male, cis, straight trolls, then a criticism like this, a kind of insistence that if Gail Simone wants to signal that she is a woke supporter of transgender rights, then she ought to write her comic books in such a way that it's consistent with the very beliefs she espouses. That's going to continue to fall on deaf ears. And it's sort of another feather in my hat for why I'm just not going to bother buying books by Gail Simone or any kind of work that she is involved in. Because even if I read it and find something like this that seems like it would be worth talking about, I have zero guarantee that Gail is an honest enough actor that it would be worth my time, money, and energy to try to discuss things like this with her. The conclusion I've reached is that for many comic book pros, like Gail Simone, social justice is something they are conveniently attaching themselves to because they believe it's important for their career and for getting the right kind of customers. But they are not sincerely interested in actually living their lives and their professional careers consistently with these values. That's my conclusion. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan, and if you disagree, we can have it out in the comments section. I love you guys, and I'll catch you later. I also want to thank my patrons on Patreon for this month. If you like what I'm doing, you can also support this channel's growth on Patreon, and you can support it by liking, commenting, and subscribing, and clicking the bell to be notified when I make new videos. I love you guys, and I'll catch you later.